So in the previous video, we saw about the events of War of Independence 1857, and we also saw how it ended in a failure. But the question is, why did the Indians lose, or why did the British win? So let us analyze from the perspective of the Indians the reasons behind the failure of revolt of 1857. We can divide the reasons behind failure into two, namely the weaknesses of the Indians and secondly the strengths of the British. So firstly, let's talk about the weaknesses of the Indians. To begin with, the Indians were not united as a nation. Means what? That there were many Indians which did not participate properly in this War of Independence 1857. They were not united. So remember our first discussion in the first video of this topic, that was the definition of war. And in that I said that it is the conflict between two nations. The question arises over here whether we're talking about this all of India fighting or not. Because when we saw the map, when we analyzed the map, we understand that not all of the India was participating in this war. For example, we talk about Punjab and Sindh. These were not fighting in the war on behalf of the Indians. And the reason was that it was the Bengal army which was used by the British East India Company to annex these regions previously. In 1843, Sindh was captured by the British. In 1846 and 49, Punjab was captured by the British, and it was done using the soldiers from the Bengal. And so that is why Punjab and Sindh did not side with the British. Actually, there were many people in these provinces which felt that the British administration is actually good. They were making railways, they were developing telegraph system, postal system as well, and so the British were being liked in those areas as well. Hence, they were not opposed by Punjab and Sindh. Moreover, there were some regions such as the princely states, namely Kashmir, Mysore, Rajputana. These were the areas which actually sent the forces in favor of the British. Secondly, we talk about central leadership. This was missing in India. Now, you can argue that Bahadur Shah Zafar was there, who was a Mughal emperor, but as I said in the previous video, that Bahadur Shah Zafar was only a symbolic leader. He had lost all the power. The Mughals by this time had lost all the powers. Even their name wasn't written on the currency. Even their official language was replaced by the British East India Company. So at this time, they did not have the actual power. Moreover, Bahadur Shah Zafar wasn't even central. He was supported by some group of people, mainly the Muslim community, but there were different people fighting for different causes. There wasn't any central government, the central Indian government in India. They lacked aim, which means that some of them were fighting because they had been stripped of their right, of their lands, because of doctrine of lapse, doctrine of paramountcy. And some of them were fighting for their own rights, for their own piece of land. No one was thinking in the broader picture, no one was thinking for all of India. And so this also resulted in the failure of War of Independence 1857. Let's move on to the strengths of the British East India Company. Now, on the other hand, the British were very strong. Although initially they were less in number and were losing the War of Independence 1857, but soon the reinforcements started to arrive. And it was the superiority of the British Royal Navy which was bringing up all these soldiers. Had there been an Indian Navy as well, a united Indian Navy as well, they would have countered the British East India Company right at the coastal areas, right at the shores. But as the Indians also lacked their navy, they allowed the infiltration of the British East India Company and the Royal soldiers. Soon the British started to come to India and started to take over, regain the control of all those lost areas. Moreover, another superiority or the concern of superiority for the British was the better transport and telecommunication. The British had in their time developed railways, telegraph and postal system, and this was now helping the British in transporting supplies and soldiers to different parts of India. The postal system was also successful in unveiling a conspiracy hatched by the sepoys of Peshawar as well, and this conspiracy was also unveiled because of the superiority of this telecommunication system of those times. Moreover, we talk about the aims, ambitions, discipline, training and equipments of the British East India Company as compared to the Indians. They were far more disciplined and united as a nation for a common aim, that was to take over India. And so they used all the power, all the means to gain control of the Indian territories and finally ended the Indian rule forever and started the British Empire in India directly. It was because of Industrial Revolution, better education, better training, that now the British had better weapons as well, better equipments as well. Whereas in the past 80 to 90 years, the Indians had already lost this uprising. How? Because of lack of education, they had lagged behind. On one hand, when the British were progressing in terms of education, in terms of industries, in terms of manufacturing of weapons, the Indians were fighting amongst themselves. And the eventual result is that the war failed from the perspective of the Indians, but the British were very successful in regaining all of India. Thank you.